Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Friday, March 22nd, TALAHour. We're really excited to have you all with us, and we're also excited to have with us both Skylar Everett and Justin Hitt from CBRE. As you know, this TALAHour series is TALA's monthly free educational webinar series where we dive into topics about related to different things about the assisted living industry, and we feature different guest speakers speaking to their area of expertise. So we're really excited to continue this series here in 2024. Before I turn it over to Justin and Skylar, I do have to share our excitement for our upcoming 2024 annual TALA Conference and Industry Expo coming April 2nd to 4th in San Antonio. We're going to be at the beautiful Hyatt Regency Hill Country Resort and Spa. So registration is now closed. However, you do have the ability to register on site starting Tuesday, April 2nd. So if you've already registered, we look forward to seeing you there. If you have not yet registered, feel free to register on site, or you can go to our website, tala.org, TALA.org, and you can purchase a networking badge, which will allow you to network at the Industry Expo, formerly called the trade show, but we're excited this year to launch the Industry Expo name and really honor our industry partners who we're so grateful to have their support working with us. So coming up, obviously we have the Conference and Industry Expo, and then stay tuned after that for more TALAHour events. And then we do have our next TALA book event coming up the first week in May, where we're going to have a really exciting guest speaker. I'm so excited about it. He is a hospitality lawyer that teaches at the University of Houston at the Conrad and Hilton School of Hospitality. So lots of really cool things to come from TALA. We're really excited to have you along with us for the ride. I am not Diana Martinez. My name is Helen Hunsinger. I'm the Director of Communications. Unfortunately, Diana couldn't be with us today, but we are very excited to have you with us, like I said. So without further ado, I'm going to over to Justin and Skylar, and they're going to talk for a little bit, and then if you'd like to enter your questions into the Q&A feature, I will be monitoring the Q&A, and we will get to your questions at the end. So guys, take it away.
Awesome. Well, thank you all for having us. Like Helen said, my name's Justin Hitt. I'm the Client Development Manager for CBRE. I work with clients across all verticals with their facility operations and challenges to help them understand how to better take care of their assets, maximize those investments, and ultimately do more with less, right? Because that is the world of facilities, and that is kind of our focal point. Skylar?
Thanks, Justin, and thanks, Helen, for having us today. My name is Skylar Everett, and I'm the Technical Director for our CBRE's West Division. And my kind of core responsibility is really ensuring that we're leveraging kind of the real estate and the knowledge and the innovations that we develop across CBRE 7 billion square feet of real estate under management, and really ensure that it's being delivered to each and every account that we do business with. And I think this is a great opportunity to talk to our organization and hopefully share some of those best practices. So with that, I'll hand it back to Justin.
Up here. Right, so here today, we're here to talk about something that in CBRE we call asset excellence. And so first off, what is an asset? And so we're referring to actual building system elements, pieces of equipment, HVAC units, electrical circuit breaker boards, everything that actually composes the facility that you operate in. And we're here to talk about how to, as we discussed, just maintain that more effectively over the long term. And we recognize that this is a journey, right? Everybody is at different places on this journey, but it is a journey nonetheless, from not great management and maintenance practices to world-class condition-based artificial intelligence integrated sorts of cool stuff. So what is that journey? How can you implement this on your site and in your portfolio? Those are the things that we're going to help discuss today. And so first off, we're going to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I don't need to remind anyone in this room that there's only one budget at the end of the day. And that's it doesn't matter if you're a technology company, it doesn't matter if you're a hospital or in the assisted living sector. At the end of the day, at the end of the year, we're judged on whether or not that there is a positive number or a negative number at the end of that profit and loss statement. And what happens in facilities is we need to support the business through all sectors, right? Whether that be recruitment and retainment of staff, whether that be improvement of the facility, maybe it's improvement, recruiting new residents to the assisted living facility. All of these items come at great cost, and there's other things that we're hearing in the industry right now. There's a greater priority of sustainability, ensuring that we're doing more with less at every level, and function. And finally, are we actually utilizing the data that we have? I think most businesses in every sector say they're using data. But again, I think it comes down to ensuring that data is functionally and actually being used. Justin, I'll hand it back to you.
And so taking those more general trends for facilities management, which transcend sectors, and applying them more to what is relevant for the assisted living and long-term care industry, we look at maintenance and equipment performance as it pertains to resident or guest safety, quality of experience, and regulatory compliance pertaining to environment of care, right? Cost certainty is fairly straightforward. Operational efficiency refers more to the actual performance of the asset over the long term and how that aligns to your strategy, whether that be letting it run to fail, which may sound like a bad strategy, but for some assets that are cheaper to replace over the long term, that is a perfectly acceptable strategy. Or whether that's managing them for high performance because they're in a critical space, such as HVAC, where you are constrained by the requirement to provide a certain temperature range for what is deemed to be hospitable. Additionally, we look at how you can integrate various building systems to help drive capital planning practices, utilizing breakdown data, work order data, and cost for maintenance to help inform what an ROI would be in terms of replacing a particular piece of equipment. And then lastly, of course, we're talking about how we can improve emissions tracking, particularly as the regulatory environment around that changes. Generally speaking, as private equity investments or public equity investments in these spaces increase, there will be an increased emphasis on emissions tracking for those upstream entities. And so it then becomes the responsibility of facilities and the management and maintenance teams to then ascertain what the indirect emissions or of their facilities are, and how do we quantify that. And so these are the types of categories that we'll be speaking to.
So one item that we always look at when we're talking about a specific sector, especially in the commercial real estate facility maintenance, is understanding what is the average age of the asset. And I think everyone on this call, you can think of probably an example of an assisted living facility that maybe just opened this year. And then I'm sure on the other half of the call, there's some of you who have experience with something that might have been built perhaps even in the early 1900s. But across the U.S., the average age is 27 years, which is a kind of an interesting number because as some of you may know, that most building systems are designed and engineered with a useful life of 20 to 30 years. So what that means, kind of given this average, is that some of these facilities are starting to do that first initial round of life cycle replacements, and in some cases, we might be starting to see the first signs of some of these assets operating truly beyond their useful life. And again, that's why this story is so important, because we need to be getting ahead of this message and ensuring that we're able to manage this. I don't want to call it a tidal wave, but this wave of asset replacements that need to occur over the next 10 years in a lot of these asset classes. And for those in the new assets, it's never too early to start planning. and those in kind of the older building class. Again, you've done it a few times, but it's great to be ahead of this journey so you can address some of those engineering deficiencies that might have developed over the past few decades. So
Yeah,
with
we
that,
see
we can,
we see the assisted living industry uniquely positioned to kind of get ahead of this. If you look at the other sectors here that we've drawn some snapshots of for hospital, higher ed, and offices, they're substantially more aged facilities, and they've got increasingly large amounts of deferred maintenance, and that becomes kind of a hamstring to their operations as they consider their 5 to 10 year plans. And so the fact that the assisted living industry is a little bit younger in terms of its real estate footprint shows that it has the opportunity to kind of get ahead of this. And so we think that's a good opportunity for you.
And sorry, real quick, Justin. I know before we started this webinar that you were having some microphone issues, but I did get a request to speak up a little bit more from somebody. So if you don't mind just projecting a little bit more, that would be great. And then maybe if you could just speak to the point that you just said, because I know you're making a great point about how the assisted living industry is uniquely positioned and has an advantage over some of these more established industries. So maybe if you could speak up a little bit more, please.
Apologies just for
Thank
everyone.
you.
I tried 3 microphone failures prior to this, so I will project and do apologize there. Well, what I was saying is that the assisted living industry is uniquely positioned to kind of get ahead of this deferred maintenance backlog. If you look at other sectors that we've drawn a snapshot from here, they're dealing with an increasingly large amount of deferred maintenance that hamstrings their operations as they consider a 5 to 10 year strategic plan. And assisted living being younger in terms of its facility age gives it the opportunity to really get ahead of this before the next wave of useful life replacements occur, to Skylar's point. All right. And so what are the impacts of this, right? So we've talked a little bit about how, the industry has the opportunity to get ahead of this, right? And so what does that really look like in terms of a contrast between status quo and what world-class looks like from a maintenance strategy perspective? And, if we were all in the room, I'd ask everyone if they could, raise their hands, but I think everyone can just do an internal reflection here. If you do have a granular database of your actual facility equipment, right? And that is down to the number of VAV boxes, rooftop units, breaker boxes. You have this all laid out. You've got plans, right? You've got an understanding of where your actual facility equipment lies and a quantity of it and a condition of it. You're doing great, right? There's a next step, of course, in the journey, but if you have all that information, you're doing great. If you don't have that information, there's room for improvement. And what we found is that most of the clients that we work with do not have a complete asset list for their facilities. Most of the time, they maybe have some of the big stuff that they've replaced over the last 5 years. Of course, maybe they've got a record of that. But in terms of an actual granular, visible, awareness of all of their facility equipment, they generally don't have it. And so if you don't have that information, it's very difficult to then create a maintenance plan for each of those pieces of equipment. And then from there, it flows that it's difficult to enforce that strategy, and you can see kind of how the journey progresses from there. These items, which of course this will be PDF'd and sent out later, and we're happy to talk in separate calls after this, we can explain a little further. But the items on the left talk about those negative impacts of really not being methodical and being thorough in how you catalog and then strategize around a particular asset list. Moving to the right, if you can, collate great data and create bespoke strategies for that set of equipment, right, you will have the outcomes on the right. You will be able to be more expeditiously identify where the root cause for a particular issue lies and address that issue quicker, which then flows into a faster work order resolution time and more satisfied individual on the other end who submitted that, or the impacted individual who was in the area that had the leak or the faulty AC. Additionally, you've got operational impacts in terms of increasing your productivity. And then of course, and we'll touch on this a little bit later throughout, but equipment that's in a proper state of maintenance consumes less energy. And so there is a direct sustainable outcome that also has a financial element as well. And these are all goals that we want, particularly as facility managers who are constantly challenged to drive costs down, right? Without impacting service. This is how you work to thread those needles. And then I believe Skylar taking this.
Absolutely. And I think I don't want to beleaguer this point too much because I think Justin just did a great job of summarizing a lot of these items. But I think the one item I will just review, and if we think about something simple like a split system on that, like, right, you have the condenser on the outside and the fan coil unit on the inside, which I'm sure is how you cool a good portion of the assisted living, actual habitable rooms or memory care spaces, is in a standard maintenance procedure, right? You'd have probably 4 visits to the site. Most of those would be to the fan coil side of the element, and then maybe 2 times a year to the condenser side. But let's use the example where it goes down 1 extra instance. And another number of the case studies that we've done is just that 1 extra visit typically can cause the operational expense of that 1 asset to rise by that 400%. If it happens 2 times extra in a year, suddenly you're likely to be more towards that 1,500%. So this is not like somebody's visiting an asset 10 or 15 times. It really can be in as little 2 times. And what happens if you have maybe a 40 unit assisted living facility, or maybe a 400 unit assisted living facility, is where we end up in one of those situations where you have those positive feedback loops where because you're spending more on OpEx, you can't actually fix the root cause problem. So again, a lot of this story comes back to how do we identify this sooner and make a plan so we don't end up in one of those situations. So that, I think we can go to the next slide. I think there'll be a little animation too, real quick. So
yeah, just to provide one last bit of color there, 1,500% sounds like a lot, right? Like, oh, that's 10x. Okay, where's that actually coming from? Well, think about it practically. What happens is, things don't break down conveniently or in convenient times, right? It's after hours, on a holiday, in the rain, when no one's available and there's a supply chain crisis. And so, the upper bound of those replacement costs can be quite high if you aren't getting to proactively get ahead of lead times and do all of these other, prudent, steps when you're working on a capital replacement. Okay, and so moving on to like what the actual asset excellence journey is, right? We've framed what good should look like and what the potential impacts are, but what are the actual steps so that way you and your teams can work through this process with your portfolios? And first, of course, is collecting quality data.
So I like when we are in the room for these because we actually have a chance to say who here has good asset data. But unfortunately, with some of these virtual seminars, we don't have that opportunity to ask that question. But I think a lot of what we find is even organizations that do have a good count of what type of assets they have in their facility, and maybe I'll take a second to talk about what an asset is in commercial real estate, people often consider an asset being the whole entire building. But we really like to consider, as Jess was saying, the asset are those systems that compromise the building, or anything that heats up, moves, and breaks. And I think at that point, I've gone full circle and described the whole building again. But even those organizations that have good asset counts, a lot of times they're missing that key data that makes it more challenging to make some of those more derived and forward-thinking decisions off of it, right? Such as missing model, serial number. And then a lot of facilities, it just ends up there's missing data, right? We end up missing components or systems that aren't actually correctly being tracked. We might have skipped a sump pump, which isn't critical until we have an incident where there's lots of rain, and then suddenly that sump pump isn't in the count. And again, when this is done right, we have the opportunity to consolidate the spend and ensure that if we are outsourcing components facility maintenance, that it's all going to one vendor. We also can better understand what skill sets are needed to self-perform that maintenance. And finally, we can manage out those ill-performing assets earlier. So again, you can typically see a reduction of 10 to 15% in the total cost of ownership by kind of following this asset-driven path. So we go to the next slide. And I recognize it's Friday afternoon, and nobody wants to be talking about assets, but I want to talk about assets again just for 1 second, and really talk about how we go about actually kind of what are the key elements of good asset data. So as I started talking about a second ago, knowing what skill sets you need to maintain, right? If you know what electrical assets you have, maybe the size of your campus, your facilities might justify having electrical higher. You can also use that same electrical maintenance tech to do maybe a LED lighting upgrade. The other component is all systems having a QR code. And I think people see enough QR codes around their life now, whether it be on the restaurant table or really, I think they're everywhere. They're almost like a graffiti of sorts. But when we see them on an asset, we know that someone's taking care of that asset, and we know that you and coming full circle is when someone actually goes out to do reactive maintenance on that asset. CBRE has found that the techs and engineers are much more likely to tie their time to that asset and help give you that total cost of ownership information if there's a QR code there that makes it easy for them to do so. I think I alluded to it a second ago on the comprehensive asset detail. We'll go on that for a little more depth in the next slide, so I'll hold off on that. But that post-collection validation. So again, making sure that the room number information there is consistent, make sure the model and serial number information is useful. Because if we do this right, this same data can feed into a number of different areas. We should be able to build our capital plan from that. We should be able to build the long-term maintenance plan. In some cases, we might even be able to directly tie this into some energy projects, whether it be a simple phase 1 or phase 2 that's just on a desktop level, because we've already given them the age of the asset. So they might not even need to come to site. And then finally is that ongoing data collection. We really believe it's best practice that people go on at least every 3 years, look at all the assets and update the condition. So we know if the maintenance strategy we're performing is delivering the right level of maintenance to these assets to actually maintain that condition we're trying to maintain per our condition. Or understanding if an asset is likely to reach its useful life so we can update in our capital planning. Go to the next slide. Again, Friday afternoon, we're looking at asset data. But again, I think it's key understanding that model number really means something. I know this is quite a large system. This is probably a 500-ton air-cooled chiller, which I'm not certain how many of these you all would have in your portfolio. But at the end of the day, the story is the same here. The model number is great because it tells us the capacity that we can use for capital planning. And it also tells us what types of critical components that asset needs, so we can make sure we have those on hand. So you're spending less time waiting for critical spares, and you don't have a resident who's sitting in a room that's 10 degrees warmer than it should be. Serial number, again, that's great for warranty tracking, which I know a lot of the buildings are 27 years old, so warranty tracking is not meaningful anymore. But more importantly, it tells us how old that asset is. So we can actually drive our capital plan from that. The other components is criticality and condition. So that top line is showing that we have an asset that's in poor condition and high criticality. So when we're doing capital planning and maintenance planning, it should be a high priority for maintenance activities, and it should be likely one of those items that we're looking to replace, but or looking to add redundancy into the system. So I think that's all I have on this. We go to the next slide. I think it's back to you, Justin.
Sure. And so once you have your data, right, the next step is to develop a maintenance strategy per asset. And so the second step of the journey speaks to that. In terms of what maintenance is a journey, right? Where in the worst cases of circumstances, things break unexpectedly and you have to go repair them, and it's an unexpected expense, right? The next step on that journey is preventative maintenance, where you're trying to be methodical, right? But the future of maintenance strategy pertains to the integration of real-time data feeds, the parameterization of equipment performance to then drive work order ticketing around when the equipment is likely to fail, rather than a preventative maintenance schedule where once a quarter we just go change the filters, right? It's more about once there is a pressure reading in a differential pressure that is higher than normal for that particular HVAC unit, then it is appropriate to change the filters. And that allows you to optimize your service. And so this is kind of the journey that maintenance strategy is moving towards for world-class facilities. And this is exactly what that journey is. So again, this will be PDF'd and sent out, right? But in terms of the spectrum of how you can approach maintenance, Skylar, you can speak a little bit more to this, right? As someone who implements it on our client accounts daily.
Absolutely. I think if we look to the right end really quickly, there it says Smart FM, predictive maintenance. And I think all of you may have been at a conference, seen something on your LinkedIn feed or somewhere along the way that says, oh, this is the future of maintenance. But I think what we're seeing more and more is we still need to have that bell curve distribution of where our assets are, and that should still be centered on preventative and corrective maintenance. And we can really only, once we have that comprehensive asset list, can we really decide what strategy needs to be deployed to which asset. So again, as Justin said earlier, that run to fail is a perfectly adequate strategy, and there shouldn't be a portfolio or an asset out there that doesn't have run to fail as part of it. But again, we really want to make sure that our plan isn't centered over reactive. And I think there's a lot of organizations out there that have unfortunately gotten a little bit on the back foot, and they've centered there. So it's kind of really understanding what assets you have and making sure you've centered over preventative and corrective maintenance, and then ensuring that you're delivering and deploying those predictive technologies where they make sense. And then we're not trying to make a sudden jump from reactive to predictive or smart FM. It's a journey. And I think we all have to be honest where we sit on the spectrum. So I think that's all I have for this one, Justin.
So once we have an understanding of our asset data and the type of strategy we would like to deploy per asset, right? These are examples of the data that goes into building our staffing model. Because one thing that we can do once we have an understanding of our equipment is actually right-size the skill sets and the team count to match that set of assets, right? This is optimizing your team to make sure that you can self-perform more work, rely less on third-party contractors, and actually reduce your total cost of ownership. Everybody hates call-outs and everybody hates like $150 hourly rates, but how do you actually structure a team in the least risky way possible to actually hit a target where you're not having to rely on those call-outs? This is the strategy we deploy when working with clients to create a staffing model for them. And so we take their asset data, we take the maintenance strategy, available square footage and site information, right? And we put that into our model where we take line by line each asset that was collected and the strategy that we'd like to deploy on that. And we prescribe an amount of time per asset to do the maintenance on a proper preventative maintenance schedule. So for example, as Skylar said, 4 times per year, you have to change filters on a particular HVAC unit. Each one of those times takes 30 minutes, let's say. And so you've got 2 hours per year per unit. If you have 100 units, you've got 200 hours of maintenance, right? Once you have a granular understanding of your circuit breaker boxes, your VAV boxes, all of these pieces of the building system, you can then build a very, at least defensible model for how much time it would take in terms of productive working hours and what skill sets are required: electrical, HVAC, mechanical, general building, carpentry, right? And so these are the outputs that kind of come out of that analysis: is how many team members need to be on site. And then of course, you want to work with your on-site teams and your own business to understand what the practical application of that is. Like, are we going to need 2 people because one person will have to be on a lift? Or, is a particular task need to be done outside of working hours because it will impact operations, right? These are the sorts of considerations that then further tailor that staffing model. And that's how you continually optimize in that respect, without cutting heads, right? Because you're essentially learning deriving how to bring services in-house, which is helpful. showing what that looked like, recognizing that this is the Texas Assisted Living Association. Here's some work that we had done regarding the Texas A&M portfolio, just to kind of show you that this strategy can be deployed at scale. And we've done this for small ones as well. I just, you know, we feel like showing the scale of this approach definitely warrants some, you know, some merit. So just to show you how that works. Happy to break this down in a separate call as well, but at a high level, we've got our preventative maintenance hours. We've got our anticipated corrective hours based on age of the equipment, strategies deployed, other inputs. And then, of course, we've got some unproductive time because realistically speaking, and I know management hates to hear this, the engineers are not always turning wrenches all the time. Like they're having to walk to sites, they're having to get their tools. And so there is what we call unproductive time. And it's perfectly reasonable to assess that there should be some unproductive time in your maintenance team. It's just what is a reasonable amount and why. And then, of course, you know, you want to keep track of this. You want to drive continuous improvement. You want to drive reporting and analytics. And so what does good reporting look like for facility services? And recognizing that, you know, there are a variety of platforms out there. This, of course, is a snapshot from our platform, but, you know, your facility management platform should be able to keep track of the work orders being performed, be able to sort them by location, and preferably some level of KPI that is tied to a metric for performance. So that way you can drive, you know, increases in that outcome in the direction you like. And of course, they should be influenced by real-time data as much as possible. Some systems refresh once a day. That is going to be less helpful than something that refreshes once an hour, right? And recognizing that there are increased costs for that approach to real time. You just work with what works for you. And then step 3, taking this information and utilizing it to inform your capital plan. This really actually, at this point, we have spoken to this in other points of this presentation, but I feel like it's worth going back to say that equipment that has not been properly maintained uses more energy and costs more to replace. And so when you deploy these strategies that we've recommended here, and you actively tie your work order data to your capital plan and inform your replacement strategy by looking at maintenance costs, you can save money and have a smoother capital outflow over a 3 to 5 year period. And
so,
yeah.
Oh, I guess this one's kind of the exciting level because if we've done this, the process smoothly, and we've kind of understood what assets we have, built the plan to mitigate and manage the risk associated with them, understanding which ones we actually need to manage out of the organization, we can really take that look forward. And I know we said not to jump from the left side of this maintenance spectrum to the right side, but I think once you really comprehensively understand your asset risks and opportunities, that's when you can safely take that step forward. And I'm not saying that everyone should use this definition, but I think it is actually a fairly useful definition when it comes to understanding what is smart FM. And what we've done at CBRE is we've really broken it down into 3 pillars, if you will. The first pillar is virtual maintenance. And virtual maintenance is great because it uses the signals and the data your buildings are already generating and helps make better use of them. I think most of your buildings will have some level of building automation system, whether that be something as so simple as leveraging data from your maybe a more limited building management system, or maybe you've actually gone and taken the step and added alarming to individual systems. The next one, the next pillar is automated maintenance, and that changes the way we do maintenance. So that's where you hear about the little sticky IoT sensors that we've been all hearing about for decades. That's where that really comes into play of, okay, we're putting this on a pump, and now we know, okay, this pump is exhibiting behaviors that it's likely that this asset needs an intervention. And when I say intervention, that means replacement. Same goes for it could go on a condenser. It could the pressure differential sensor between filters to make sure that we're only changing the filter where we need to. And then finally is dynamic services. Dynamic services is definitely more janitorially focused, And that's ensuring, and I'm not saying you guys have conference rooms, but traditionally the thought process is in an office space that maybe has full occupancy on a Wednesday and 30% occupancy on a Thursday, why are we cleaning all of the spaces that were not used? And I think in your cases, maybe there's a more of a communal restroom. That might be an example of, okay, it hasn't been used on that frequently today. We don't need to address this. Or perhaps the cafeteria is less busy on the weekends. Again, it's variable, and it just gives us an opportunity to rethink
I'll
where
give
we're doing
another
maintenance
example
and how
as
frequency.
well that
Go
we're
ahead.
seeing. Yeah, I'll give another example as well that we're seeing is you can affix these to the consumable dispensers for toilet paper, paper towels, and such that when it's out is when it raises a work order to be refilled, rather than having, you know, kind of this uncertain nature of when the custodial staff has to go and refill those consumables. It's reactively raised immediately when it's required. Additionally, you can look at utilization trends to then right size future RFPs. So as you kind of understand the utilization data and you understand that, well, they've had to clean, and outside of regulatory requirements, right? Because sometimes you do just have to clean in between a stay, of course, right? But outside of that, where there's cleanings over and above the regulatory standard, you can get a quantity of those by understanding how many times those work orders have been raised for reactive cleaning, in addition to consumable refills. And then your scope of work for the future RFP that you run for custodial services will then say that this is the scope of work, and it's 6 cleans here, 15 refills on this, you know, comprising X number of, you know, paper towel or toilet paper rolls. And so that's then how you can get more apples to apples bids from those competitors, competing firms as well.
Yeah, and that's all I have for this one. I think the next one is the case study we have.
Yeah.
And Justin, do you want to take this one, or would you like me to?
Yeah, no, I'll take it. So just
Okay,
to show
perfect.
that, you know, this works, right? And again, we do this in healthcare environments, and so this is an acute care facility where you know, again, proving that this works at scale. Of course, we've done this at client facilities where it's, you know, 20 to 30,000 total square feet of facility, which for larger assisted living communities, that's actually nothing. And so this is just kind of showing that we can do this all the way up, and have produced, in this case, it was an 80% improvement in work order resolution, and a number of other beneficial outcomes. And so this is what, you know, your facilities team can do when you kind of deploy these strategies on site. If, you know, and of course, this is why we're here. If this is something that you decide is not something that you'd like to take on, or you'd like some assistance in taking this on and would like to explore some partnership, you know, hit us up after the call and we're happy to talk about that. And with that, got any questions? Happy to take questions.
Great, yes, well, starting off, I have a question and I have a comment which might lead to a question. So, my first question is, when it comes to the assisted living industry in Texas and the size of the physical buildings, whether they're large communities or houses, themselves, if I'm remembering correctly, in the assisted living industry in Texas, the majority of assisted living communities are actually fewer than 16 residents in one community. So just thinking about some of your steps here in your process, I can already think of some ways that all the advice that you've shared could be applied to some of those smaller, you know, smaller buildings and smaller setups. But, you know, just out of curiosity, what would be your perspective on, you know, a smaller building where, you know, maybe it's kind of, you know, a bare bones team situation, and you know, kind of how would you apply all of that knowledge in that kind of situation?
I'll go first, Skylar, and you add. I would say it's fairly straightforward. With the smaller footprints, it's actually easier, right? Because there's just less there. And so as long as it really becomes a matter of setting aside a little bit of time to kind of programmatically work through this when you have time. Because understanding, like, you are working your day job, you're doing your normal responsibilities. And so, you know, that this isn't something that, you know, maybe if you're lucky, everything quiets down for a whole day and you can go ahead and knock out a good chunk of this. But for most people, that's not realistic. And so it's just about being methodical and working through that, you know, line by line. And once you've done it, it's like it is an investment that you've made in your facility operations. And so it produces the, you know, returns kind of like we've talked about. It's just about setting aside that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Knowing what you have first of all, yeah. Um, okay, great. And so I have a comment, and maybe this will lead me to a question, but bear with me because I know something, you know, just thinking about what makes the assisted living industry, you know, special, and certainly, you know, we have, like you're saying, a big advantage. Our industry is, you know, isn't as far along maybe as some other industries are, just in terms of how long we've been around. But I know something that I know, you know, I'm really proud to say, you know, as part of an organization that represents the assisted living industry. But something that happens frequently in assisted living communities is we have really, really high tenure of facility managers. And I know at our upcoming conference, we're actually, I don't want to say too much, but we're actually recognizing and have had many, many award nominations from people wanting to celebrate folks that have been with their communities for at least a decade. And I can think of a couple award nominations that we had where people were with the community for 20 years, for example. So, you know, just thinking back to, you know, investing in your labor and your workforce and, you know, kind of making the most there, you know, looking at people who've been with a community for a couple years. I can't help but to think that there must be a way to kind of, you know, invest in that talent and also, you know, get some training or, you know, something to help make that person a little bit more qualified in some specific areas to kind of, you know, not have to call in those, you know, specialists who cost, you know, 150 an hour or whatever.
You know, one group of one peer group that I highly recommend being involved in if they're in that position, and it's something that management teams can bring to their technical workforce as well, but is involvement in like the IFMAs of the world, like the International Facility Management Association and some of those trade organizations. I particularly call out IFMA because they've got and I'm a member of it as well, and a lot of our engineering and facility managers are members as well, and so it's a good one. They have professional certifications, right? So there's certified maintenance technicians and other types of, you know, 3 letters at the end of your name that are applicable to your profession that help give them those skills. And it's, you know, and I think that kind of answers that question to some extent. But then beyond it, it's the community of professionals who are also achieving the same thing and working on other client sites. And I think that does help share these best practices in a much more day-to-day. They've got an active forum where people are asking questions every day, and the email goes out to the membership, and people just chime in and answer, and relationships, you know, get created that way. And I think that's really great for facility technicians who are often kind of in a vacuum in those in-house models, right? Like if they're not with an outsourced provider where you've got kind of that broader workforce in that same field, it's you really are like, you know, that's why they're so cherished on the communities, right? Is because they are the facility technician that's been there for 20 years and they've been by themselves. But to that end, they're by themselves, and so this is kind of a community that I recommend some involvement with to that end.
The only thing I
Great.
would add, and maybe it's too much of a tangent, but would just be ensuring that that the facility managers are taking time to go visit the community colleges and the tech schools in the region. I think that's some of the best conversations that I've had. Is I think we have a partnership with Weatherford College out near Dallas, and going out there, which is traditionally it has a tech school portion, and just meeting with the both the students and the faculty not only helps ensure that we as an organization have people to kind of fill those shoes that will need filling in the near term, but as well as kind of just generating interest in the industry. And I think everyone can recognize the criticality of the assisted living industry.
Absolutely. Okay. Okay, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I don't currently have any questions so far. So while I wait for anyone to drop in their questions, I will say that if anyone does want to speak further to Justin or Skylar, that you're actually going to be having a booth at our upcoming conference and industry expo.
Yeah, you know, we are actually really excited about that. We have just through our daily work, we had heard that this facilities management and facility challenges were kind of persistent in that they hadn't really been addressed through the TALA conference, supplier network of people who've been there, and you know, our whole business is to help clients better take care of their assets, and so they all have a happier facility management experience. And so we're happy to kind of bring that set of expertise to the conference, and look forward to meeting people in person, answering any questions you have, and just getting to know people better.
Great. Well, I don't see anything else coming in through the Q&A, so thank you so much for this really, of course, just as soon as I say that, I get a question pop up here. So let me see what this says here.
Yes.
Okay, so this question says, adding on to the smaller facility discussion, are there more basic CMMS solutions to consider?
Yes, there are very basic solutions out there. I think the least expensive I've seen that has some functionality, and I'll have to look up exactly which one it was, but it was about $400 a month or so. And so that's fairly basic. Beneath that, it's not that platforms don't exist. I just have found that they're difficult to add assets, or it's just difficult to add maintenance planning to them, to the assets, and tracking's a little harder, reporting's not great. And so that's kind of the price point I found, where you kind of get the functionality that you're looking for. To that end, our system comes with any service that we manage on client facilities, and the cost of that is that same roughly $300 to $400 a month. So there is great functionality out there at that price point. Don't get conned into paying $10,000 a year for some system. You just don't really need to do that most of the time.
I think it'll definitely be interesting to see, certainly as the assisted living industry continues to develop, how this kind of all plays out in the next couple of years. And certainly, just hearing and learning from your presentation today myself, I feel like, I can definitely see the importance of this moving forward. So, okay, well, last call for questions, I think, officially this time. And otherwise, thank you both again so much for sharing your time and expertise today. And we look forward to having you present at the conference and trade show coming up, Industry Expo. It's no longer the trade show. April 2nd to 4th in San Antonio. For attendees today, this call has been recorded, and we will send out the recording and the slides that Justin and Skylar went through today. And otherwise, if you haven't registered for conference yet, you will be able to, starting on site April 2nd. Otherwise, we hope to see you in San Antonio, and we hope to see you for other TALA events in the future. So thank you so much, and hope everyone has a great day.
It's great. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.